Welcome everybody to our next indie showcase here on the channel, where I spotlight the variety of indie games and demos we play here. If you'd like to submit a game for a future video, please get in touch. But we are starting off with the game Flowing Lights. This is it's described as an arcade puzzle shooter, where your challenge is to not only kill each enemy for each section, but do it in the fastest way possible. And the game is definitely one of those examples of a title that has a very specific core gameplay loop and does everything it can to explore all the various ways of doing it. You get different kinds of shots, as well as a further challenge when it comes to gravity, manipulating the physics of each area, causing bullets near gravity wells to slingshot around, or pull you into another area. As you go throughout the game, you'll get introduced to new elements and new wrinkles to the puzzle formula. Now, the thing about Flowing Lights is that each level or each kind of zone is put into a linear pattern, or it's a fixed cycle each time. So you're not exactly dealing with RNG, it's more about figuring out how do I solve the various shot patterns and whatnot, and do it in as quick of a time as possible. And if you don't care about getting S ranking or being top of the leaderboard, you can take your sweet time to do it. So this is one of those games that we played it a bit on stream, and I stopped playing it just because I felt like the loop just wasn't holding my interest enough, and that is always the risks or the downside of games like this. That if the moment-to-moment gameplay is not hooking you 100%, it may not be enough to get you motivated to play it all the way through. But I would say that this is a game that if you enjoy what you're seeing, or if it sounds interesting, then I would say definitely at least give it a check and see if you can make something out of it, or if you enjoy it more. We now turn to the game Sockventure, and this is a brutally challenging 2D platformer disguised as a childhood story. You see, a child has lost his favorite pair of socks, and he's called in the superhero to go into the cursed washing machine in order to find them. That is the actual story of this game. I am not making that up. But unfortunately, despite the childlike whimsy of that story, the washing machine apparently is a brutally difficult platformer. Pretty much along the lines of, say, a Super Meat Boy or Celeste. And do not let the bright graphics fool you. This is a very challenging game. Our mission is to get through each one of the game's major acts, find the important pair of socks, and get out of the washing machine. There are no bosses, no enemies to fight. This is just pure 100% platforming. As you play through the game, you'll unlock additional tech, including dashes and other ways of manipulating your character. And I cannot stress this enough that this is a difficult game to play. The amount of movement tech you will eventually unlock does get a bit extreme, especially when you get to larger rooms that will require you to do a whole lot in a single action or in between each checkpoint before you can actually save your progress. This also really comes to a head in the game's final section, that is a auto-scroller, almost Kaizo-like challenge. And if you are not in the mood for a super challenging platformer, Sockventure is not going to be the game for you. But it reminds me of another game that I played that I really enjoyed that will be showing up in a later spotlight, Sunblaze, in terms of being a really solid 2D platformer. And if you are somebody who likes to play games like Celeste and Super Meat Boy and so on, definitely check this one out, as if you enjoy that very challenging movement tech and bonus secrets and challenges, this game will be right up your alley. We now have Nongunz, the Doppelganger edition. This is a 2D roguelike shooter, where we are exploring a mysterious temple and shooting many things that get in our way. The general process of the game is that each area is procedural, and we need to move through it killing enemies and getting to the next section. You can find items and equipables that will change your character or add passives to it. And this is one of those games that when you first look at it, it seems like there is nothing wrong with it. But unfortunately, this game has one very major flaw, and that is the onboarding. This is perhaps one of the worst examples when it comes to onboarding that I've seen a game do. You see, the game makes use of lots of symbology in terms of various abilities and powers, but there's no tooltips or any idea or any attempt to explain what anything does. The game features kind of an idle style system that is never really explained or referenced, but apparently it shows up every time you want to exit the game. The game just seems to have this big case of not wanting to explain anything and everything about how it works to the player. For instance, you can't shoot up. Normally, you can only do it by performing a slide. And the tutorial itself is just very bare bones. Now, with that said, the art has a very interesting look to it. The general gameplay, once you get into it, can be compelling. But especially in today's market, no onboarding is just not how you want to approach designing your game, and it leads to a lot of churn and just players being frustrated when they have no idea what is happening. I think with a few UX passes and playtesting done, I think Nongunz could be a very interesting action roguelike to try out. But if you're interested in it now, I would only recommend it if you don't mind being utterly confused by a lot of its mechanics and systems. So with that said, we're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we have 3 more games to look at for this week's showcase. And as always, if you're interested in my thoughts on design, then check out my following books. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with free-to-play coming in 2022. For our next game, we have Orbital Bullet. Now, this footage is taken from its early access from 2021 and may not fully represent the current version of the game. This is an action roguelike, where our key element is that we are moving 360 degrees around these various towers, where our goal is to kill the enemies, move to the next floor, rinse and repeat. Now, because it is 360 degrees, when you shoot your bullets or special ammo, it will go and rotate around the tower. Your progression in this one is going to be getting new skills. You choose a starting class when you begin a run, and that in turn will unlock different passives that can show up as your character gains experience and levels up. And these passives can change how they move, attack, so on and so forth. Long-term persistence involves unlocking permanent upgrades, new classes, and new things that can show up in each run. And the game itself, of course, has that very detailed or very stylized pixel aesthetic. Now, with that said, my main issue that I have with this game is that it felt like the beginnings of each run kind of was lacking in terms of interesting choices. When you start out, you really don't have a lot in terms of weapons and tech, and you kind of go through the early game slog of getting some interesting powers and upgrades before the runs start to come to life. And when you die, of course, you go all the way back to the start. And it didn't feel like the combat and just general gameplay was holding my attention, much in the same way as some of the other action roguelikes we've played. I think variance may be like the biggest weakness of Orbital Bullet, at least in the version that I played. That I felt like the runs are just a little bit too samey at the start. But the game has, again, been upgraded and updated since I played this one, and I would say it does have some interesting aspects, especially in terms of having a little bit more movement and verticality to it, compared to some of the other action roguelikes. So if you like what you're seeing, I would say at least give this one a check and see where it is at right now in its early access. For our next game, we have A Token War. And this is quite an interesting one. The store page describes this as kind of a deck builder roguelike meets turn-based strategy, and in a way that's not too far off from this concept. So this is a game, as you can see, it is turn-based, where you collect various tokens that represent different units. Each unit has its own unique abilities, health, defense, you get the picture. And it's your job to complete an ever-escalating series of battles in order to basically take over the land. You lose if your headquarters, that's my little house in the bottom left, gets taken out. You win if you take out your opponents. Now, there are several things that kind of differentiate a token war from some of the other games that we've played. You have a limited number of actions that you can take per round. And that's very important because you'll field oftentimes more than 2 units. So you'll have to kind of weigh the strategy of, do I attack twice, move twice, attack, move, attack, special, and you get the picture. The game boasts battles that are both fixed as well as those that are randomly generated. And your challenge of the game, much like in a deck builder, is to figure out what units and special abilities you want to build your strategies around, and then hopefully deal with the enemies before they take you out. Now, one of the things that's very interesting about this game is that I do like the combination of units that you can make use of. It has that really good sense of, do I try to go for a very specific build? Do I go for the Island of Misfit Toys? Etc., etc. And the AI in this game is certainly no slouch. If it sees a weakness it can exploit, like it did to me when I was playing when it comes to range units and vision, it will exploit it. And this game can be on the harder side because of it. But I would say that if you are a fan of turn-based strategy games and you're looking for one that not only has that turn-based critical thinking, but also the randomness and variance of a roguelike, then definitely check out Token War because you may find something here that you would enjoy. For our final game of this showcase, this is Mayhem in Single Valley. We played the prologue for this one in, I believe it was 2020 or 2021, but we also ran through the whole game on stream as well. So this is a puzzle action adventure game where we have unfortunately stumbled across the zombie apocalypse, and our town is basically going to hell in the process. And it is up to us to figure out what's going on, save everybody, and hopefully not die in the process. So the game itself, while it may look like a Zelda-like or your traditional third-person action adventure, this is definitely more puzzly than those kinds of games. You do get the ability to not so much attack but defend yourselves from various enemies, but your main thing is basically figuring out how to get past enemies and solving the game's myriad of puzzles. And there is a lot of variety in this game, from defending style missions to auto-scrolling racing sections, stealth, and a lot more. I think the kind of pixel art or the style of this game looks really nice, and some of the animations are well done, especially with all the ways you can actually be killed in this game. But make no mistakes, like this game can be on the frustrating side. When you don't have a kind of trash can lit as a shield, you are always one hit from dying. And there are loads of environmental obstacles that can kill you easily in this game. Now, with that said, my main issue that I think I had with this game was that some of the areas did prove to be more frustrating than anything else. The game has been toned down quite a bit from the demo that we played, particularly in terms of the amount of reflex-based gameplay you're going to need to survive, but it does have a few annoying sections to it. I also ran into a bug late in the game that kind of soft-locked it, and I'm not sure if that got fixed or not in the game since we last played it. But The story is interesting. I don't want to spoil it, but it has one of those twists that once you kind of see where it's going, you'll know kind of where the story is going to end up. But it was still entertaining nonetheless. And while it's not my favorite action-adventure game, I would say if you at least try the demo and you want to see more of it, then at least give the full version a check and see if you'll enjoy it. But just keep in mind about some of those frustration points, especially with some of the pass-fail puzzles that can kill you and then you're back to the previous checkpoint. But with that said, we'll wrap up this indie showcase here for today. I would like to thank the developers who submitted games. You'll find links to everything in the description down below. And as always, if you submit a game for a future one, please get in touch. Do all that liking and subscribing and check out our Discord and Patreon. And be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games.